So this is the buyer education panel. And what we have is we have 4 buyers and one person, Michelle, who you all met yesterday from Field to Family Food Hub. And they're going to answer some questions about why they're buying from either food hubs or direct from farmers, and some challenges and tips about how to do that from the buyer perspective. And so I'm just going to go through, they're each going to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask them each questions in turn. So we'll start with Rick, and I'd like you to introduce yourself, why you're excited and passionate about the potential of food hubs in a wholesale setting, and then also what led you want to purchase local food.
Well, yeah, I'm Rick Christensen. I'm the buyer for one of the buyers for Co-op Partners Warehouse. We are not a food hub, so I'm a little bit of a fish out of water in the discussion of food hubs. I don't really buy that much from food hubs either, but we work with a lot of farmers that also work with food hubs. Co-op Partners is the wholesale distribution arm of an organization called Twin Cities Co-op Partners that also includes the Wedge Co-op and the Twin Cities and Linden Hills, that are retail stores that serve neighborhoods in Minneapolis. Co-op Partners Warehouse sells to about 300 customers in 7 states, in the 7 states of the upper Midwest. But most of our business is in the 60 community-owned food co-ops in this region. It's about 80% of our business is selling to them. We're a bit different from other wholesale distributors in that I think we're the only community-owned co-op distributor in the country. And we're a purpose-driven wholesaler. We have multiple bottom lines. And one of the key aspects of our mission is to help build a strong, equitable food system from top to bottom. And as such, we treat our farmers as partners in this endeavor, and working with local farms is a huge part of our game. So we're not a nonprofit and we're not a food hub, but our mission is right in line with many food hub missions. I guess that's it.
Great. Thank you, Rick. We're going to go on to Michelle. And I think we already know quite a bit about you, but if you want to answer that question, that would be great.
Okay. Hi, I'm Michelle Kenyon, Director of Field to Family. We are a nonprofit food hub. We were formed due to a community assessment that was done by the county that found that there was a need to fill for building our local food system through wholesale. We have since stretched out and expanded to serve direct to consumer as well. But our base and our foundation is through wholesale sales in the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids area of Eastern Iowa. I work with a lot of customers who are really enthusiastic about adding local to their menus, but have never done it before, or don't have time to source from multiple farmers. So we have a thriving food scene here in Iowa City. So we work to expand the local availability and not replace what other farmers have already started here in this region with growth.
Thank you. Maggie, good morning.
Morning. My name is Maggie Maggio. I'm a K-12 food service director at a district here in Minnesota. So we're a first ring suburb of Minneapolis. We have about 3,300 students. About 74% of them qualify for free or reduced lunch. So we're a fairly low income and also very diverse district. So we have purchased from a food hub here called the Good Acre for a number of years. And I also, in a previous district I worked in, was one of the first school districts to purchase from the Good Acre and really helped establish their K-12 programming that they do. So I think food hubs are a great way to expose students to new foods and flavors, since we're able to source some different produce than we can from our main produce vendor or our prime vendor, and also a great way to teach students about where food comes from. And I think what really led both in my previous district and in my current district us to purchase from, want to purchase local food and particularly work with this food hub was, putting money into the local community. We're a pretty urban area, but not too far from the Twin Cities. There are a lot of farmers that we want to support. We found we can get higher quality ingredients than we can from other vendors in a lot of cases. And we can get a bigger variety of ingredients. There's some fruits and vegetables that just aren't available more widely. So it's nice to be able to use some of those. And then we also, with our partnership with the Good Acre, they provide a lot of educational materials. So even though that's often challenging to do in the cafeteria, it is a nice way to expose students to information about our food systems and where their food comes from.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Let's go next to Lori Stern.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So obviously right now I'm the executive director of Midwest Organic Sustainable Education Service, but previous to coming to Moses, I had 6 years of operating a local food restaurant in New Glarus, Wisconsin. It's a relatively small community, about 2,500 people, but because of the brewery that some of you may have heard of before, particularly in the summer months, it would swell to, you know, adding 5,000 to 6,000 people a day in tourist season. We had a small farm. We were operating a bed and breakfast and really committed to, while people stayed with us, connecting them to where their food comes from. And they would often ask us, you know, where else can we find local food in this community? And sadly, I'm sitting in a county that just is very much into buying from Cisco primarily. And so there really was no local food. And I don't know, for some reason, though I had never operated a restaurant and had really spent my career in health policy and education policy and nonprofit management, I said, no, let's just open a restaurant. It was very much mission driven. The point being to educate folks about where their food comes from. I think the other piece that was really important, obviously, you know, Maggie touched on it too, is that local economic development, rural economic development, specifically the money that gets spent in the community stays in the community. So that was a huge motivator. And then just also, you know, carbon footprint and, you know, where is the food coming from? How far is it traveling? And this idea that we've all kind of come to where we can have whatever food we want, whatever time of year it is. And so we actually did a lot of customer education in the restaurant, because if tomatoes weren't in season, your BLT would have tomato jam that was made from the tomatoes that we put up when they were in season. You know, in February, you got strawberry ice cream, you didn't get strawberries. So I think, you know, that's just always been a huge passion of, you know, supporting local farmers, paying them the prices they're asking, educating folks about where their food comes from. We were hugely motivated by reading Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle, where they talked about a year of eating local and really wanting to give people in our community and tourists as well that experience of what does it mean to really ground yourself in local food.
Thank you, Lori. April.
Good morning, everybody. I'm April Yancer. I am currently with the Department of Agriculture in Wisconsin, and I run the Farm to School and Institution in Wisconsin Food Programs, which basically means I support the connections between small-scale local farmers, supporting farmers who are USDA defined as disadvantaged producers, and connecting them with supply chain partners who can get their products into schools, corporations, campuses, and corporate scale operations. My background is in, I think I've been in food system development as long as I can really remember. I started a farm in 1997 and did specialty crop production for high-scale restaurants in Chicago and Madison and Milwaukee. And in that process, connected to a distribution co-op and became a co-op member owner and marketed our products that way. I've done consulting for co-op development for small-scale farmers, and have worked for aggregators and have been an institutional purchaser. So that's the background that brings me to my role at DATCAP. And food hub development is really is an important piece of local supply chain development. I mean, we do have means to purchase food from Cisco, and we can work really hard to get our local products into Cisco, but it doesn't really create an equitable supply chain. It doesn't give small-scale farmers the power to make some decisions about price points and how their businesses are run. So food hubs are a great piece of that local supply chain that provides opportunity to create equity and keep our food in our communities.
Thank you. Wow, I'm excited to have all you here today. So we're gonna move on to what was once the third question, and it is, what were some of the challenges that you experienced in sourcing local food, And how did you overcome these? And I think that that'll be kind of different across the board. And so we'll go back to Rick.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, as a year-round produce distributor, we're buying from a lot of farms from all over the U.S. and actually overseas at some points. We see our role is to keep, I see farmers from, some farms seem to think that California is the big evil empire, farms around here that is. I see the farms as being partners in the game. If the co-ops that we're serving aren't well supplied with good product in the wintertime, they probably are not going to have the customer base in the summertime when the local product is there. So the regions are placeholders for each other. It is true that there are many challenges working with smaller producers than there are larger ones. On small farms, oftentimes the grower is the marketer, the salesperson, the tractor driver, the handy person, whatever. And there may be times when there's an immediate need for communication and that farmer is not available. That is usually not the case with larger farms where there is a salesperson to get in touch with. One of our jobs as a wholesaler is to make sure our customer shelves are full at all times, and irregularity of local availability is generally more irregular than on the national scale. And when it isn't unavailable, I try and get product from out west to cover it, but there's a 5-day time lag to get product harvested and shipped from California to here. And sometimes it makes it difficult to remain fully stocked. Another one is some customers are going to be price shoppers, and they may buy product from a competitor who doesn't support local when the national market is low priced. There's also, I think the biggest challenge between small and local really is in the economies of scale. With equipment, labor, inputs, packing materials, and almost everything needed to farm, the cost per acre or per unit produced goes down significantly as the amount of acreage farmed and the tonnage harvested goes up. That's a reality that's very difficult to overcome. From a wholesaler standpoint, one of the more impactful results of economy of scale is in post-harvest handling of product. In general, large farms have resources that are not available to smaller or younger operations. In the fresh produce world, as soon as a product is picked, we're in a race against time to get it into someone's mouth before degradation or decay takes over. And the quicker you get the field heat out of veggies and fruits, the longer their viable shelf life will be. Any tool that can be used to help us in this race is a positive. And many larger farms have the resources to utilize advanced and expensive equipment using forced air, pressurized icing that will cool product down in an amazingly short period of time, adding many days to the product's viability. Small farms that do not have access to these processes have to rely on other less effective means of cooling, hydrobaths, hand icing, and the like. But local farms do have the advantage of minimal travel time when compared with product shipped from long distances. So the question between top of the line post-harvest handling versus less travel time is a complex one, involving many variables for each farm and each season and each product. But in general, being on the short end of the economies of scale puts the smaller producer at a distinct disadvantage, both in cost and production and in treatment of product.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I mean, that's the big issue, right? Is how do we help these smaller farmers kind of not necessarily scale up to that level if that's not what they want to do, but how do we support them and these the folks who are participating today? How do they support these smaller growers so that they can provide that higher quality product? Yeah, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Michelle. If you need a refresher on that question, let me know.
Oh, that's good. Rick, you had a great answer. There's a lot of information, good information that you've shared there that we've experienced as well. When we first started, we knew that there was a demand. We did not know the supply very well. And we found several farmers that were ready on wholesale, ready to go, had been working their market, able to get up there, but still mid-size farmers. But they were struggling. They were struggling with morale, just working so hard and still not making ends meet year after year. And so, of course, we came in to try to help them and get them over that hump. At the same time, though, we had several farmers contact us and say, hey, we want to scale up. We want to get up there. And the challenges that we had immediately were, that they lacked the understanding of what that meant. So anything from they didn't really know how much they had in the ground or how much they needed to put in the ground to fill the cases that we needed to meet orders. They didn't know their own business well enough. So we were able to send them in a direction to get more training before coming back to us later. Also, some of them who were ready and had scaled up had specific delivery schedules, harvest schedules and delivery schedules that didn't match up with what our customers needed. And so we had to work through those challenges together, which some of them we were able to figure out, and some of them we just weren't. If the customer couldn't store it for very long, we couldn't store it for very long, or it was just too long after harvest, it just wasn't going to be able to work. But when the sales would get a certain level, often the farmer was able to change their operations, but not always. The other challenges we had, of course, is the price point. Working with farmers who even are at the wholesale level, getting those customers to agree to a price point that pays them a fair and equitable wage for their product was a challenge. As you mentioned, a lot of the customers were adding us as a source, but they already worked with Martin Brothers or Cisco, so they were used to those prices. We were able to identify certain crops that could be equitable, so we would work really closely with farmers to be able to source those identified products to get them into the schools and other cafeterias that we work with in the region. But still only a few farmers were willing to go down that as low as it needed to go. And again, we were able to measure that these were fair rates at some point, but they were only fair to farmers that were at a certain size. The other factors of storage, just in general, storage and transportation, a lot of farmers had to build that within their own system. Of course, customers had their own infrastructure involved. So we would need to work with customers that have certain requirements for delivery that farmers weren't able to meet. So we've had a lot of challenges, but based, with time and being able to slowly scale up with the farmers, that we've been able to overcome them as they go. Many of them, though, who had initially expressed interest in scaling up to wholesale have looked at other markets, direct-to-consumer markets, to fit their needs, which works really well for us because then we're still able to nurture the ones who are there and who want to be there and are still getting there.
Michelle, I have a question about that. So if you're in thinking about that buyer education about the price point and why something costs more, is that something that you've been able to communicate? That have buyers been able to kind of understand that why it costs more, and have you worked with anybody who's willing to build in that extra cost of what it actually costs to produce food? How has that conversation gone?
Yes, so we have been able to find customers who are willing to pay more. Absolutely. They understand that they need to pay more for local. However, so what we've had to do is really dive down into look at specific pricing for specific crops and see what's the most comparable. We identified right away that lettuce, for instance, would never be comparable with local prices, at least at the school level. University level, it's a little different, but at the school level, with what they're paying currently for lettuce from California, we're just not able to match that without them spending, up to 10 times the amount that they spent. But when we were looking at that. So if it's 10 times more than the distributor price, then that's off the table. But if it's 3 times more, we put it on the table and we work it out with them. We provide samples. We work to determine if we can meet their specs on those products. And yes, so it has taken time, but we have been able to identify those that they're willing to pay more for. Of course, these are schools that are in a contract, a strong, huge, long-term contract with a distributor, but have some, money outside of that that they could spend on local, and they really work with us to put that towards local as well. And then again, the other component that I wanted to add to this really is staff preference. So we work really closely with food service staff because they're the ones who are on the front lines of this every day. And if they love the food that we're providing, then they advocate for it. And so they advocate for spending more. And what has surprised us is that they've advocated for us not only when they need to pay a little bit more, but when they have to do more work, which is weird, which surprised us. And that just comes down to is quality. So with the melons, they're used to getting prepared and chopped melons from their distributor, but when we bring them local melons, staff prefer it so much, they're willing to come in and do the extra work to prepare them. The other aspect of this really is just building up that supply so that the cost can come down a bit for the farmer. And that takes time, obviously. But the supplies, once it gets to a certain point, it makes it a lot easier for a farmer to meet the price point. And when, of course, it gets scarce. So we love the cherry tomatoes run. We get them so much. We really are. I feel like one of my personal jobs is to sell out of cherry tomatoes as much as possible because they're so easy to get on that salad bar, get in on that tray. And we've heard so much great feedback from students and food service staff. I love it so much. So just a no-brainer. But once they get scarce, the cost goes up. And at that point, though, the students are hooked, and the food staff see the kids choosing that and then not choosing that when it's not local. And so they advocate for us then as well. But ultimately, the melons and the sweet potatoes and the zucchini and the cucumbers, those prices are fairly comparable to what we can get for them and they can get from their distributor.
I had a quick question before we move on. Have you ever had any issues where you've had an advocate in a school system or institution that then has moved on to another job and the person who transitioned in was not as supportive?
Oh, absolutely. Staff transitions within schools happen all the time, and it's the worst news ever for us because we've built those relationships. But we try to keep, we bring together food service staff in quarterly meetings just to have a chance to meet, collaborate, share, talk through ideas, share how they do recipes and how they prepare fresh foods. So we try to encourage them to bring other staff to those meetings. So lately we had a huge school district in our area that did have a new food service director change. And my heart just plummeted when I saw that announcement. But then when I saw the name of the person who was taking over, I was relieved. They had already attended a couple of our meetings. We knew who they were at least. And we're really hopeful. But at the other scale of that, we work with a large university here. They have multiple cafeterias, multiple managers, and we lost a really great one not that long ago. And what we've tried to do to remedy that and get the new one on board is to pressure them with their peers. So they work, they get together with their other cafeteria managers of the other different departments in the university, and there are advocates as well. And so they've given us some ideas on how to take on the situation, which we're planning to incorporate next week. But yes, no, staff transitions are very challenging.
Some universities have local food initiatives as a part of their mission, and also initiatives to support local businesses. And so if the university pulled out of their support for the cafeteria, you may they may have in their mission statement that initiative, and it just might help to pitch that if that university has a local food initiative
Absolutely.
and a mission to support the local community.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Michelle. And I forgot to mention that at least with the schools that we've worked with, as much the K through 12 schools, we've worked with their school district to get a line in their job description that they post that requires them to work with Field to Family to source partially local for their school lunch menu. We've been successful in that in a couple incidents. We're hoping to continue that as well.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Maggie, do you want me to remind you of the question?
No, I have it in my notes, so I'm good.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Great.
So I think some of the challenges that we have faced, so when we first started to work with a food hub here, the quality of produce we were getting was not what we were used to getting. So I'll give a couple examples. So we bought some sweet potatoes and parsnips the first year, and the sweet potatoes were enormous. I'm not exaggerating. They were, I mean, you could hold them up to like an average person and they took up the whole torso. So you could hold them like a baby. They were probably 8 to 9 pounds. And those just, you know, the actual, when you managed to cup them, the quality was fine, but our staff in the school district just wasn't used to processing really any fruits and vegetables like that. And then when you're asking them to, you know, how do you start cutting into something that massive? You know, we did culinary trainings, we did all of that stuff, but it was quite the task for them to take. So, you know, we learned to be more explicit about what we were expecting, and that, you know, that level of difference from the normal, you know, the normal sweet potato wasn't an acceptable product for us. So that was a real challenge. And, you know, I pictured our HR department being like, you're going to have injuries, you're going to be paid so much in workers' comp because they're either going to cut themselves, or, you know, the struggling to cut in is just quite the challenge. So, and then the parsnips we were buying were not, frankly, good quality parsnips. They were super woody. They had a terrible texture. They did not taste good. And I just remember having discussions with the chef from the food hub we worked with, who did culinary training for us on them, and talking about how, you know, she kept making the argument that produce doesn't have to be perfect, and this is what you get from a local product. And we have to learn to accept imperfect produce. And, you know, while I personally agree with all those things, and I would like to agree with those things professionally, I think especially when we're working with kids, the first time that they're exposed to a vegetable, it can't be the worst example of that vegetable. So, you know, for me to eat the parsnips, I grew up eating parsnips. My Irish grandma made them all the time. I was fine. I knew they weren't great parsnips, but I like parsnips. But, you know, once a kid tries a parsnip and then the rest of their life, they think, oh, these are impossible to chew. They don't taste good. It's just, you know, we're never going to get them back, frankly. And I think, you know, if we built a program where they had parsnips, you know, in the fall 2 or 3 times a year, and then every once in a while you got a not great batch of parsnips, that's different. But I think there has to be some level of quality to them so that they're actually appetizing and the staff is able to prepare them. So we've struggled getting produce. So, you know, it's not like when we buy from a produce vendor that if the local cantaloupe season is bad, they're just sourcing cantaloupe, you know, from California or wherever it comes from. You know, if we have cantaloupe on the menu for the middle of September and it doesn't work here in Minnesota or Wisconsin, then we're not able to get that cantaloupe. And, you know, that can cause a lot of issues for our staff who are expecting to order something, and us being notified about something being out of stock. So I think that can be quite the challenge, and it takes a lot of education around it to understand, especially in schools where not so much with the fruits, but in schools we have vegetable subgroups we need to follow for menus. So if suddenly we're expecting something and we don't get it, it can create issues with our menu planning and also our costing of things too, because we operate on such thin margins. So I think those are the 2 challenges we have probably experienced the most, in addition to our staff learning how to cook some of these products that we get. Like you've really struggled with roasting, the idea that if it's brown, it's not bad, you haven't burnt it, it's getting caramelized, it's building flavors. And I think that's something that we've tried to overcome by doing trainings with staff, bringing in chefs, bringing in outside people to talk to staff about how something should look. This is what it should look like. This is how it should taste, so that they are aware of that. And that's not always easy for us to do time-wise or budget-wise, but I think it is important when you start working with different products and expecting different culinary techniques from staff. So yeah, I'd say those are our biggest challenges we've seen.
Thank you, Maggie. Lori.
Yeah. So it's been interesting to kind of listen and recognize that, I'm on a panel with people that are institutional buyers and talking about, the needs of scale and all of that, which I totally understand. I think that I just wanted to kind of put a placeholder here as we think about even farmer development and business planning, that I got to sit in a very unique place of really sourcing from small farms, because we were a local restaurant committed to wholly locally sourced. And so, some of the things at the beginning, though I had a small farm, we did more animals than produce. So understanding seasonality, it's like, I mean, definitely there were challenges. If I had planned a special and suddenly the crop wasn't there, I put in the order and there was a rain event and we weren't going to get it out of the field. But I had much more flexibility. So I think for folks that are kind of listening to this and thinking about food hubs, I just want to at least marker the fact that institutional buyers, obviously economies of scale, all the things that we've talked about are really important. And at the same time, what my restaurant represented was potentially the stepping stone into that the expectations that kind of Maggie mentioned about, things that come in the door. And we were running on really slim margins too, because we were paying farmers their asking price. I didn't haggle with prices with farmers. I had a few farmers that were all sending me their availability lists at the same time. That was a challenge that we had to get to the point where we were at least coordinated in that, so that I could look across the farmers that I was working with and make some choices about what I was ordering for that week. And I was just in a place where, I built a bigger walk-in, because I was in a small rural place and I wasn't going to get deliveries every other day, which, Madison's not that far from us. And, I had a chef come into the restaurant from Madison, and she just was amazed at the size of my walk-in. Well, it's because I could get deliveries once a week from these farmers, because that was when they showed up at my back door. So, just getting into that kind of groove was a potential challenge. But it made it possible to build those relationships, to talk about seasonality, to talk about expectation of product, because anything that came in my door, even though we knew how to deal with it, and we were doing a lot of prep and we were putting a lot of food up, every extra wash that we had to do, any product that we had to throw away, that was impacting our bottom line too. So it was, I got to view it much more as a relationship. I know that when we were trying to increase purchasing of local food from other restaurants in this area, that, it's just that challenge of, oh, I forgot to order the carrots. Don't worry, I'll just call and they'll be here tomorrow. Like, that is just not happening in sourcing of local food. So that can be a challenge, but because the restaurant that I had was in it for the mission of connecting folks to their food and buying wholly local, those were challenges that I was kind of willing to take on. So I think somewhere here is a potential answer in terms of a small local restaurant that can really kind of get people's toe in the water in terms of selling into wholesale and building relationship and starting to understand at a very real level, when a product comes in the door that, I hated to turn things away, but I had to be hard-hearted and do that too. I mean, there were just some things that weren't, I can't have that loss either as a restaurant owner. My margins are slim, and just it's a relationship and it's a conversation.
Thanks, Lori. I have one quick question about that, about buying from farmers. Were you sitting down with folks over the winter with farmers and talking about a plan for what you would like at different points in the season so that they could put that into their production plan and plan for it?
Yeah, I mean, as best we could. And then over the years, there just became a rhythm. I will have to say that, restaurants run, cash flow is always a challenge, but you just have to be aware as a buyer, if this is what you're committed to, that, we're getting to the point where onions are going to be gone. And I'm just buying up as many onions as I can because I've got to get myself through winter with local onions. And if it's not onions, then I have to think about what I can use instead. Same with celery. And it's like, okay, the soup's now got, the mirepoix's got celeriac. You just have to start thinking about those things. But I remember just buying up like every case of butternut squash I could get. Because no matter how much planning, there's seasonality that you're still dealing with. And we were just roasting off like tray after tray after tray of squash and freezing it and making squash butter with it. And so that, yeah, if there was squash in the middle of winter, when there was no squash in the field. So having to deal with that cash flow, that's part of a, potential buyer education strategy too, that would have to happen. At least on this small scale, it sounds like the institutional buyers and certainly the grocery stores, to Rick's point of how they're having to augment produce from other parts of the country. I just didn't, I had the privilege, the luxury of saying, no, we are locally sourced and this is what you do. And there is food available in the winter in the Midwest. And it's because we plan for it and cash flow has to address it, and the planning with farmers as well.
Thank you. April.
Thank you, everyone. This is a great conversation, and I'm glad I had a mute button so I didn't interrupt you guys. So I was so excited about the things I was hearing. And I think it really just, Lori, you just segued to what I was going to address beautifully, is that, our local food systems and our, they're built on social equity. So these are relationships, right? So in a local food system, it's about your relationship. And you are a small scale farmer and you go to farmer's market, it's about that relationship you have with the little kid who loves to eat your sorrel at your stand, or, somebody who, I love when I have an elder population who comes to the stand and they see something that they used to eat and that they haven't been able to find, and just how much happiness it brings to them. And over time, you develop these relationships with your entire community because you are providing them with something that takes care of them spiritually, emotionally, physically, and keeps them connected. And that's why our local food movement over the past 30 years has been incredibly successful. And now we're looking at, all right, well, how do we get our local foods into institutions, and how do we build those relationships? And that's the piece to remember, to build off of everything everybody else had said, is that even at an institutional level, these are relationships. And how do we translate that? And how do we show what that relationship is? And how do we communicate what that relationship is when there's a food hub involved? And so I think it was Rick who was addressing this, that farmers, it's a one-person show in a lot of cases if we want to support these small scale producers. And then we have buyers who have heard the narrative and understand the narrative that has been built in local food systems, that it is a relationship and I want to buy direct and I want to support my small scale farmer. And so in my work, I do experience from buyers and producers a resistance to include a food hub, include a middleman, include something that might cut into their profits, or, there is a bit of a hesitation to, because it feels more right in some level to buy direct and have that very direct relationship with the person who's growing your food and the person you're selling to. It feels safer, it feels easier. And so really the education component on both sides, that what does a food hub really offer a small scale producer? We want to help people scale up and we want to do these things, but in most businesses, there is a system for outsourcing your needs. You hire payroll, you hire accountants, you hire a tax prep preparer, you contract out your plumbing, you do all of these things to, like, you can focus on what you do, and there are all these other businesses that you contract out your work to. Agricultural businesses tend to not do that. Their profit margins are small, and they're watching their profits closely, and risks are high. And again and again and again, small scale farmers choose the path to do it all on their own. And so I think one of the things a food hub can do is really show a producer how you're supporting their business, not just with like giving them a sales and distribution, but like really how does a food hub work to provide services for a business that is growing independently, and communicating that to the buyers as well, that it's okay to work with a food hub and not buy direct, because these are all the services that a food hub provides for a producer that allows them to scale. It's giving additional resources that allows this farmer to scale. That means that they don't have to work as many hours, and they don't have to take a class on payroll, and they don't, they can do all, not that food hub necessarily doing payroll, but all of these things that a farmer tries to do in one day by themselves, or with a very scaled back staff and very limited financial resources. There's a real opportunity for growth if we include food hubs in that relationship. And I think that part of the work that I do right now is really working at some of the language that we use when we discuss food hubs, that these are really businesses of service for agricultural producers and for local food buyers, that this is really a service business in a lot of ways. And I did want to make some comments about like the lettuce scenario. It reminded me of, as an institutional buyer who was there temporarily, I was there specifically to look at moving a kitchen to from scratch local sourcing that was not there at all. So I knew my stint there was temporary. And one of the things I did, we bought lettuce always local. And the reason that we did that was it was much higher in cost. It was a lot higher in cost, but it was always good. There was no waste. There was minimal waste. Obviously, our customers liked it a lot better. It was easier for the staff, so our labor time was down. So really looking at how you can include, as a buyer and as you're trying to justify your budgets and where your money's going, really including, well, it takes half as much time to process this labor, or it takes half as much labor time to process this lettuce. So we can afford to buy it. It's actually cheaper when we look at the whole big picture. We have less waste, and a lot of institutions are going to, they have sustainability models that are starting to include accounting for food waste. And so if you can include that into your, budget, your budget layout, that like, okay, where's our waste? Well, with local lettuce, we don't have waste, not nearly like you do. You throw half a box away when you get lettuce from California. And somebody gets a gross piece in there inevitably, because it's really hard to sort. And then you have a dissatisfied customer, and people questioning your food safety. Like, it's just really across the board so much better to use high quality. So we had a hydroponic or a aquaponic lettuce producer in our community, and we bought year round from them, as well as basil. It was wonderful. And one thing I did, because I was leaving, was I would bring vendors in to do demos. So why is this meat better to work with? How do you work with this meat, this beef cut that came from this local farmer that's not consistent every time, and it's not pre-cooked, and it's not individually packaged? How do we do this? I would actually have the vendor and a guest chef come in and work with the whole staff on, this is how you work with this product. We did it for lettuce, we did it for fish, for beef, anything that the staff was used to getting frozen, pre-cooked, and they just normally would throw in the microwave, and now they were cooking from scratch. I'd have them work directly with the vendor, and it gave them a real opportunity to build that relationship. and to know that person and to have a good time with them in the kitchen and to talk about the product and to really make those connections. And then when we had consistent purchasing, I would hand off receiving to somebody who was not normally a receiver for all of my local products. So I would receive the Reinhardt truck, but the people who are working with a product were assigned to receive the basil, the lettuce, like whatever we were buying from our local vendors, so that they could have that relationship and that they knew what that process was, in hopes that when I stepped out and moved on to my next position, those relationships were strong, and there would be people within the kitchen saying, oh no, we don't get our lettuce from Reinhardt. Like, we have to go with this person and I'll take care of it because I already know how to do it. And I think that was somewhat effective. So just as we go through our institutional processes, really making sure that those relationships are being built, those direct relationships. And then also the other challenge that I faced as an institutional buyer was, I was a culinary director. I didn't have a lot of say in the budget of the institution that I was working for. So really doing whatever we can to elevate those relationships with our vendors, to connect with people who are in charge of finance. And so if there was a institutional wide event happening that was public and, you know, high press and high profile things, making sure that our local vendors were there and that they had a chance to at least meet the people who were in charge of organizing and fundraising and all of these much bigger institutional financial pictures that is in a culinary department you don't necessarily connect with. So really putting high profile events, getting our producers there and letting the finance people feel connected to their food as well and where it comes from. So I'm gonna stop talking. I've been talking a long time. I could talk forever about this. Thank you.
Thank you, April. You brought up some really wonderful, wonderful topics. And I think the idea of the connections, you know, when we think about food, we think, or I do at least, I think about connection. I mean, it's something that we all put into our bodies every day. And those relationships around food are, I think, paramount and are what are going to help sustain and build these food systems. So yeah, thank you. There's one piece that I'd like to add in here. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this course yesterday, I was an organic vegetable farmer. I sold to Minneapolis Public Schools, direct to restaurants, to 2 food co-ops, and direct to consumer through CSA and farmers market. And one thing that I found, as you know, in my first season, when I was trying to start forming these wholesale relationships, is I reached out to our food co-op in our very rural area, and you know, spent some time trying to convince these folks to buy from me as a small grower. And over time, they started buying more and more because I would sell them a case of, a half case of chard. So 6 bunches of chard. Now that's not worth it for me to drive to town, but when you add on, 25 pints of cherry tomatoes and other things, there was value to them in that they don't sell that much chard, but they had a lot less waste. Back to that waste piece that April talked about. So thinking about kind of these ways that we can support smaller farmers who are starting out and helping them to form these relationships, whether it's through a food hub or directly with, smaller restaurants, smaller grocery, where they can form that relationship and provide something that smaller grocery maybe can't get otherwise. And that grocery was willing to pay higher prices to me because they weren't throwing out 12 bunches of chard, for example. So that's just another thought in there. We're going to get on to the next question, which is, what topics or processes need to be addressed with potential buyers in the systems that you have been part of, whether that's buyers as individuals or institutional system issues. And I know we've touched on some of this as we've gone, but if everybody wants to chime in, we'll go in the same order. So Rick, you want to start?
Okay. Yeah. So one thing I love what you were saying about relationships, April. One of the things that we have done, and I don't know how applicable it is to food hubs, but Co-op Partners actually encourages farms to sell around us, sell directly to our customers, and we incentivize it by providing logistical services. we will deliver product to our customers with our orders from farms for a fee that is incrementally lower than what it would cost a farm to do it themselves. The farm doesn't have to have a delivery route that way. The stores get multiple deliveries from one truck. It took a lot of trucks off the road. It's improved the efficiency of the system, reduced the carbon footprint. Yet the farms still get to maintain a direct relationship with the stores. They take direct billing. They get the higher price that they can get from a store. In some regards, a lot of people say that's probably not a good thing for a wholesaler to do, to cut the middle person out when you are the middle person. But for our standpoint and for our mission, it made a lot of sense. It is kind of a linchpin for a lot of growers in this area now that depend on this service, and it's working out really well. So being creative in ways like that is what we need to be if we're smaller. As to other processes, buyers, to Maggie's point about the giant sweet potatoes, buyers, if they can, should be specific with their expectations, talking to either a farm or a food hub about sizing and tolerance of defects. And Lori, what you were saying about being able to adjust your menu to what was available, that's wonderful. It would be great if larger food service places could do that on a regular basis, because the seasonality and availability of product is going to change pretty significantly on the local climate and in the local community, especially with weather issues or whatnot. For a food hub, does it have the infrastructure to meet the potential buyer's food safety requirements? For instance, does a cold chain need to be maintained, and is it able to do that? On another level, some institutions that CPW has dealt with base their buying on a bid system. The cheapest bid gets the business. Small scale and organic producers are at an inherently disadvantage, are at a huge disadvantage when trying to participate in a system like that. I guess this points to an editorial comment that I would say is that this kind of points to what is at the root of rot for the entire food system in the US. Food is simply undervalued. Markets are based on false realities fostered by a hugely subsidized conventional industrial agricultural system and a big box store driven retail environment in which the race to the bottom is the norm. And one of the side dishes of this unhealthy meal is that budgets for food in many institutions are often seriously underfunded. I don't know how to get around that, but it's there. I think the reality is that environmentally, nutritionally, and culturally, the cost of cheap food is very high. Yeah, I guess that's about all I have at this point.
Thank you, Rick. We're going to head over to Michelle. And panelists, if you want to chime in and have conversation, feel free to do that as well. I think we have enough time. So.
Thank you. And thanks, Rick. Yes, agree to everything you just said there. We are working within us, at least with Field to Family, we believe in the stronger community-based food system, and we're living in an entirely different world than exists out there. So in many ways, and bringing our message out to the community is very important. And it's something we try to convey with everything that we do, and the importance of a community-based, secure, resilient food system, one that values the true cost of food. But here we are. We work with a lot of different customers who come from different areas, and we're looking at some of the barriers and challenges we've had is, the basics. Having them understand seasonal menu planning, as you mentioned, Rick, recipe development, processing. So they only have so much processing capacities. They've taken a lot of that out of their systems internally in their cafeterias in the past 50 years. So we are dealing with that. They're also bringing some back in and helping them choose the best ways, the best equipment to bring in has been part of what we've been able to offer our customers. Then again, like that mentoring, sharing ideas with other food service directors or other restaurants or other hospital administrators, and just getting those groups together to talk about how they're solving these problems and their interest really has been very valuable to overcome a lot of the barriers that they have internally. Also, what you mentioned is, Rick, too, is just finding the person who makes the decisions, their own internal processes. The larger institutions have varying ones, of course, and sometimes they're very specific and sometimes they're very vague. The vaguer ones are really hard to figure out, and you know, we just have to spend more time diving deep into those. But the more communication, the more working with internally with our system, we're able to identify easier ways for us to get in. I mean, we've been working with the University of Iowa for quite a while, but we just found out there's a way for us to put a bid in on a seasonal product in a way that we didn't know about before. And we've done that and been very successful in getting that in, but we've been working with them for years. And how is this just now coming to us? I don't know, but we're grateful as anyway. It just, again, like everyone, when you're not in that system already, in their internal system, it could be a huge mystery and really difficult to unpack. Specs are very important. We do ask very specific specs from our customers. And if they don't provide that, we share ours and ask that and find out if that will work for them. The component I just wanted to bring home again was that mentoring. We work with a local economic development group here that brings together a lot of the people who do source food in this area, and they help advocate for us as well. But just getting those people together in one room has been really helpful for them and for us as well. So that's, you know, there's always going to be challenges. This are always, you know, it changes all the time when it comes to sourcing food in general. And so building those communities to be able to support each other and including local food in that conversation is important.
Thank you, Michelle. Maggie, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I think some of the things that I think have needed to be addressed when we've been purchasing local food are a lack of knowledge on behalf of my staff of the importance of local food and why we want to buy local food. So I think, you know, when we're talking to cooks in the cafeteria, they come from all different backgrounds. Some of them have, you know, had their jobs for 26, 27 years in the district where I work. So they've been doing things one way for a long time. So I think it can be challenging to educate them about how important local food is and why it may seem like more work. But, you know, here are the benefits to it. And in my position now, I've been really lucky. I think people have really embraced it and seen the benefits of it. But I think, you know, that hasn't always been the case in situations where I've worked. And I think the more we can expose them to the reasons why or how local food systems work, that's really important. And the food hub that we've worked with here has been great at doing education sessions for cooks and teaching them about, you know, the different food systems that are around us that maybe they were not aware of. And I think over time we've seen, and someone mentioned this earlier, I'm sorry, I don't remember who, but the sense of accomplishment in, you know, preparing foods, that it's not just, you know, some of the heat and serve food that they've made for a long time. Like they can really think, oh, I learned something new and then I made it and then I saw kids eat it and enjoy it. And I think, you know, that can be a great motivation for some of that extra work that sometimes goes into some of the local foods we purchase. So I think that is a really important step because, you know, for people in my position, many of us, you know, embrace local foods and want to do that, but then we need to get other people on board with it as well. And then like I talked about when I gave those two examples, I think being really clear on what you need and how you expect to receive products is so important. You know, like we're used to getting things one way and maybe that's not how the local food comes, or the local farmers don't know how schools work necessarily. So, you know, I've been working with this food hub here for a number of years now, but I remember last fall, the buyer said, "Oh, I got the really small apples that schools love." And I said, "The what?" And he's like, "The small apples." And I said, "Did I tell you I wanted small apples?" And he said, no, but I know schools really like the small apples. And I mean, maybe some schools do, but in my experience, I've never seen schools serve especially small apples. So I was like, no, I don't want those. So thank you for the samples. I'm sure they'll be delicious. But so I think remembering that schools and any of the other, you know, food service sectors that people work in are not, you know, all the same, that there's a lot of differences, and being clear about that, I think, is so important. And then, you know, one of the things that we really like is to be able to plan out what we want and when we want it. And we found that that obviously really helps farmers too, to know what to grow. So we've been lucky with the food hub we work with here to have, you know, a meeting January, February in, you know, the beginning of the year, to say these are the items that we would anticipate wanting to use. You know, we'd want these for September, these for October. And you know, like I talked about before, if the weather, the, you know, season doesn't cooperate, then we don't get those, but it's at least a nice way for us to be able to plan and know what we're going to get.
Thanks, Maggie. I think that point about every district being different is a wonderful point, because I too have heard that, oh, these small apples that are not, you know, what folks are used to retail, schools love those. I also heard that. So that's a very interesting point. Thank you. We're going to go to Lori.
Yeah, I think, you know, just in, rather than just like repeat so much of what has already been said, I'm going to just kind of cast back a little bit in my career to prior to opening a restaurant, working in education. And I worked in this space between public health and education, and worked with a lot of schools around the country around local food initiatives and you know, anti-obesity and bringing up school gardens and getting more local food into school districts. And so I think and being now here at Moses as well, it's like a part of my job is policy. And so I think some of what people have touched on is really critical to remember is, you know, where are there's small p policy, which are those kinds of things that are happening within institutions where you're working. And you know, April's point about who are the decision makers and do they have the ability to make, you know, develop relationships. I think that in working with school districts, we found that the people in the purchasing department that were either approving or denying invoices, they needed to be on board with some of these decisions, whether it was not allowing cookie sales to go forward, if that was the new policy, or purchasing local food. You know, there are these policy decisions that institutions make that are of the small p variety that we can really influence in those relationships. And so kind of remembering that. And then I step up into kind of where I am right now with Moses and looking at federal policy and some of those things that are getting in our way from, you know, I think when I first got to Moses, I ended up submitting comment to USDA around food safety issues that were just going to become onerous for small and medium scale producers. If I buy spinach from Bill, I don't need a paper trail, and I don't need him to hermetically seal, and I don't like all of this extra plastic and extra. And now does he need a computer system? It was over the top. And so I think being aware always of these policy pieces that might come down and affect us later, and that it's a lot to kind of track when we're all just trying to keep up with supply chain and who's got what and where's it coming from and who needs what and at what size and all of those things. But there are some decisions, and we're going into Farm Bill season, and so many of these issues are absolutely, I mean, that's what's in the Farm Bill. And I think to Rick's point about the cost of cheap food, and I think in agriculture, we just haven't done that relationship building of folks in other sectors, whether it's climate, whether it's public health, like where can we kind of build those relationships so that we're starting to advocate for things like access to fresh and local foods for, you know, SNAP participants, and how do we get EBT into more farmers markets? And I know Michelle had kind of talked about that yesterday too, about the ability of, you know, some of these food hubs that are doing direct to consumer to ensure that we're getting food into households that may not be able to kind of afford the higher price point, the privilege and the luxury of eating food that's local and organic and fresh and healthier and higher in nutrition. We need to be thinking about those equity issues. And sometimes that's going to require a policy approach and looking at fair access to markets and antitrust. I mean, there's some really big issues here that are impacting our food costs and making all of our jobs and all of these relationships more difficult. And so, in my current job, as opposed to, you know, I used to do policy, opening the restaurant was my ability to be grounded in my local community, really contribute to the economic development, connect people to their food, be small, be in the world the way I wanted the world to be. And now I'm back in it and realizing that we've got to do these big policy pieces because we're fighting systems that are unfair and they're unjust, and if we keep doing the workarounds, that's great, and it's important to get this food, you know, this food on the plates of families and kids and in senior centers and in hospitals. And at the same time, we have to be kind of watching the bigger picture and what's likely going to come and continue to make this harder than it should be.
Thank you, Lori.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Do you guys require GAP for all your small farms or all your participants?
Let's see, Rick, Maggie, Michelle, April, do you all want to chime in? Anybody?
At this point, we don't. I do foresee that there is a day coming where we are going to have to the food safety issue will make us require GAP, but at this point we don't.
I know that's an issue for a lot of small growers to sell to public institutions of any kind, whether it's a school, a prison, or any local government type of entity.
Yeah, if our customer requires it, we work with those farms that have that GAP certification to fulfill those orders. But we don't across the board yet.
We do, just for food safety. We work with high-risk populations, so it's an important thing for us to make sure that we have that.
It's an ongoing conversation amongst growers and buyers. What your food safety plan is. Almost all institutional buyers need to have some record of documentation that says they've checked into the food safety of the products that they're bringing in, and GAP certification is a real easy one to easy from the buyer's end to require, not easy from the farmer's end to fulfill. And we're finding that there are aggregators and food hubs and this service points and distribution are offering group GAPs. So some of the most successful aggregation businesses that I see are offering group GAP to their small scale producers, especially when they're working with people who English is a second language, or written transaction, writing invoices and keeping records and sending in applications is a little more challenging for them. The aggregator or the food hub will offer that as one of their services, and that really brings a lot of value to that business if they're able to provide that for their customers and for all of their small scale growers. It can be a barrier for individual growers, but it's group GAP certification of a lot of different varieties can be something that's easier to manage from an aggregator perspective.
April, that's something that we, and as we're thinking about supporting these small farmers and helping to level that playing field and get more growers access to these wholesale markets, that group GAP sounds like it's going to be a key to that. And we do have somebody from the University of Minnesota Extension Food Safety on this afternoon to talk a lot about that.
I had a question just about the form that produce is coming in and whether needing it to be processed, maybe in particular, Maggie, for you with the school system, how that's been addressed, and whether you contract out to someone else or you mentioned being able to do some of the processing on site, but I know I've heard from school districts and from Ohio State, when they were working with local producers, that getting the product kind of in that pre-chopped, pre-cut form was important. So I was just wondering how you've all kind of dealt with that if needed.
Yeah, so we currently don't send anything out to be processed. I know some bigger districts here in the Twin Cities do, move through a processor first. I think one of the advantages that we've had working with the Good Acre, the food hub here, is that they will handle some processing. So I know I had asked about green beans a couple of years ago from them. And, when we buy green beans from either our produce vendor or from our prime vendor, they come clipped so that, my staff doesn't have to clip, thousands of green beans if that's what's on the menu that day. And the time they weren't offering that, but they heard that was a need that was out there. And so they are offering that. I think last year they started doing clipped green beans and then again this year. So, it costs us more money, obviously, but stuff like that is important. I think we've also been able to get grants from our county or from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture or other places that can help us with some of the processing. So we have equipment that we've been able to purchase to cut things more quickly, to do some of that stuff, and also the training for staff, like I'd mentioned before. So it really just depends. It's kind of me looking at the cost of the processed product versus the cost of the whole product and then paying staff to process it. I will say, we all are probably experiencing staffing is a huge issue with hiring people these days. So I am looking to purchase more processed stuff coming into the fall because I simply can't hire people to do the work. So it really just depends.
I can speak really quickly to that as well. In Wisconsin, schools have local control, so there's not this unified procurement process. And so all kitchens are different. Some kitchens are fully equipped and have amazing facilities to process their own food. Others have no kitchens and just have a space to heat and serve. So it's really all over the board here. And we have DATCAP, we have a grant where we're piloting getting more local foods into one of our mainline distributors who has a processing facility in Kenosha, and over like a 3 to 5 year period, like really filling that product line with Wisconsin product. And then Green Bay also has a processing USDA grant where they're processing, I believe, in the school and building out their own minimally processed facility. We have a couple of farmers that have built out small facilities. And so we're always looking at, okay, we almost look at these as not just like sweet potatoes. We look at it as, do we have processed sweet potatoes and do we have non-cut sweet potatoes, and what are our sources? And we almost always run those two supply chains parallel because we know they need to come in both forms for different schools.